I am honored to be moderating this post-panel conversation with these very distinguished guests who I am going to allow to introduce themselves.
Good evening, Shon E.
Okay, hold up. All right, so as Shon Williams stated his name, Shon, if you wouldn't mind, for everyone, for those who may not be familiar with you and your work, if you could just introduce yourself, say your name, and also the organization you work with and your relationship, either to incarceration and or ways in which the communities from which you come from have been experienced segregation, displacement, and confinement.
Shon Williams, I spent 26 years in prison with a life sentence. I was released in 2019. Worked for the Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, outreach coordinator / reentry specialist, and just trying to help better the community and bring some of the guys home.
How y'all doing? My name is Ronald Marshall. I served 25 years in Angola. Been home less than 2 years now. I took a 12 this year, in 2 years. I'm a policy analyst at both. I draft legislation for currently and formerly incarcerated men in housing, reentry, education, justice reform. Recently wrote a mental health bill that's sailed through the session this year and was passed unanimously. Governor John Bell was signed this year, Act 214. And my connection to this work started on the inside. It didn't start when I come home. It started on the inside. I was a jailhouse lawyer on the inside, carried my own weight. I carried the weight of many men on my back, litigating their cases, fighting for freedom. And when I walked out of prison, Mr. Norris Henderson, the founder of VOTE, recognized my talents. Hey man, come on, you come with me. That's where I'm at now. And I believed in lived experience. I use my lived experiences to push narrative that influence policy changes on both the state and national level.
I'm Veterinarian and I've never been incarcerated myself, but like all Black people I know, I've had family members and loved ones incarcerated. And my work is focused on climate change. I'm a climate change writer, recovering podcaster, all things climate communications. And I'm very interested in incarcerated populations as a frontline community to climate change. It's often not thought of that way, but if you think about it for like even 5 seconds, you can't unsee it. So I'm very excited to talk to y'all tonight.
Okay, thank you all. Let's give our panelists a based on these experiences that were shared and also the work that people are engaged in right now, I'm honored to sit with you all to hear y'all reflections on the films that we just saw. And two things I want to say to Shon and Ronald. Welcome back home.
Thank you.
We're glad y'all are here.
Thank you.
And Ronald, when you were speaking, you mentioned the work that you're doing as a policy analyst at VOTE, and many of those initiatives that you're working on. And you also stated that your work didn't start when you came home and started on the inside. A lot of times when people are talk about the work that they did specifically, quote, as a jailhouse lawyer, it doesn't fully capture your work as legal scholars. So I want to take this moment to acknowledge Ronald's work as a legal scholar, and also holding a weight of not just his case, but also litigating on behalf of so many of the men he spent time with in Angola, and how he's extending that work as it relates to the work he's currently doing with VOTE, Voice of Experience. And I'm gonna come back to you, Shon, to give you a big shout out, because I'm very a big fan of your work based on what I learned from you a year ago when you was on the panel. So there's a few things I want to come to, and The first film, when I first watched it, I felt like it was a love story. In terms of the letters that was written and the power of storytelling, both in the written form as well as is released to film, and how it created a greater connection. Mary, I'm gonna start with you, especially specifically as regards to your work. As a climate writer and activist, bringing attention to these issues and the intersections of climate and I would say climate, the environment, as well as confinement in the context of prisons. About 20 years ago, I was part of an organization and we was engaging in work looking at the correlation between prisons and environmental racism. And one of the things that was not shown in the film, as relates to starting from the beginning, the first film, is the ways in which many prisons are located in areas that are economically depressed. And if you wouldn't mind, based on your work in terms of climate, and also the ways in which communities are displaced and isolated from their loved ones, if you wouldn't mind just sharing some thoughts and words and reflections, although it wasn't highlighted in the film, but just to share the relationship between, from your work, as it relates to climate and incarceration.
Yeah. So I was invited to be part of this panel. I knew this question was coming, and I kept trying to think about where to start. And it's so hard to figure out where to start because you can start almost anywhere. So and once you start, you won't be able to figure out where to stop. So we'll see how to do that. I guess one of the first ways that I think about climate and prisons, like let's go with the past, present, and the future. So in the past, they are connected in the sense of they both take off at the same time. Fossil fuels and prisons take off at the exact same time, just the end of or rebranding of slavery, however you want to think about that. And both to do things, the labor that rich white folks don't want to do. So you have like the automation of things through fossil fuels, that's powered that way. And then you also have prisoners doing the things we couldn't quite automate, like building a levee, or today fighting a fire, or doing the really dangerous work of fighting a fire. And so, there's plenty of other ways that they're connected in the past, I'll keep that brief. And in the present, there's just a plethora. So as I was watching the film set in San Quentin, one of the other things that was happening at that time was horrifying wildfire season. That was the summer that we saw the skies of San Francisco turn red for days and days and days. And that's happening at San Quentin too. And they're breathing in that air at the exact same time that they're trying to fight off this respiratory virus, which of course makes you more susceptible to it. We can also think about climate change or prisons and heat. It was kind of hot this summer, right? And if I'm hot, imagine how much hotter it is in prison. Imagine how much hotter it is on a plantation prison. I attended an event at Whitney Plantation last weekend where I learned that the only time it's too hot to go work on the farm at Angola is when it's too hot for the horses. So I'm still trying to figure out how that's supposed to be not cruel and unusual punishment. And we still use prison labor today to deal with climate mitigation, things like maintaining levees, things like cleaning up after a hurricane, things like fighting fires, like I mentioned before. And so then there's also, I could go on, and I will if you get me later on. But then there's also the future of it. So prisons are already hellish, and then you throw in climate change, and so that there is no way for that not to become actual hell in the future. And so climate change forces us into this moment where we have to rethink everything. People often ask, like, is the world ending? It's like, it's kind of just falling apart, and it's up to us to figure out what we're going to keep and what we're going to do away with and what we're going to transform. And I don't see a way to keep prisons and be humane. If they don't have a humane past or a humane present, they definitely don't have a humane future. So it's time to seize the moment.
Ron and Shon, based on what Mary just shared, and think about the relationship between the prisons The prison industrial complex itself, as relates to the violent formation of the United States, is also in regards to the 13th Amendment, and we know that slavery is still legal in this country, with the exception of prisons, right, and prisoners, and how Black people in this country, especially in the state of Louisiana, have always been a permanent majority of people incarcerated. And also how people are incarcerated, their labor are continually being exploited, especially when there's a major focusing event, like a pandemic, or we think about disasters and the cleanup work that's required afterwards. And also just everyday life events where people are incarcerated are expected to work and engage in labor. And that labor is also, when we think about what is the standard, as you mentioned, if it's too hot for the horses, then the human beings are, okay, you won't work. And so we're Shon and Ronald, if you all would mind reflecting based on what you've seen in the first film, as it relates to there's this crisis in the context of the pandemic, and how organizers was able to exploit that because, like the horses, the horses are not the problem, right? Let's be clear about that. Is that just saying about like think about this idea of like Black violence and death, and you could easily put the blame on the horses, but the horse is just a metaphor, right? But how they was able to organizers was able to use the pandemic in ways to see the humanity of people where they're not seen every day at all. And so it was a love story, beautiful story, but also the power of storytelling, to be able to tell their stories using film. And in this case, very few times we see someone come home and to be able to see the footage of that. So I wouldn't mind if you all go around with Shon to reflect on that first film, what you saw, what came up for you in terms of your own experience. And also the challenges. Getting free is a huge battle. And once you're home, that's a whole nother battle of engagement, and you've been gone for so long.
That Rayburn Correctional Center in Angelo, Louisiana, one of the most racist and horrible, barbaric prisons that I've ever been in. White supremacists ruled there. It lives in the belt of the Klan chapter. They still wear their stripes on their arms and sleeves. So while there, I'm doing my work. I was working by 3 amazing attorneys, Christian, Emily, and Rebecca. The pandemic hit. We were already suing DOC at the time. DOC, this prison here wasn't following any of the guidelines. We were just doing us, sitting next to each other, hugging, kissing on each other, no social distancing, nothing. And I'm looking like, man, these people are crazy. So Kristen asked me on the phone, she said, Ronald, are they following CDC guidelines? I said, hell no. They're just as happy they want to be in here. She said, listen, I want you to start writing down everything you see and everything you hear. So I began to write these detailed dispositions down on JPEG. And I'm emailing them out all day, every day, all day, every day. And next thing you know, boom, we got this big old lawsuit going in federal court. It was my lawsuit, but we also fighting for everybody that's in there. They asked for my release, but the federal government cannot release a state prisoner. The law prohibits that. But when I tell you this lawsuit made that entire Department of Corrections stand up straight, they hated me. I'm talking about they hated me. Everywhere I went in that prison, I hear them whispering, that's Ronald Marshall right there. He the motherfucker that's got us doing all this shit. They hated me. And we worked them until I walked out of there. I come home 2021, October the 12th. And when I walked out of prison, not only was my fellow brothers happy to see me go, those redneck correction officers was happy to see me go. So many men died in that place. I buckled up. I had 3-4 masks on. I come too far in prison fighting for my life to let a disease kill me. I refuse to go out like that. My spirit too strong. I buckled up. I'm talking about every time I got up, put a mask on to everybody else. Don't come talk to me without a mask on, bro. Stay 12 feet away. I'm gonna survive this. I come from the bowels of hell in Angola to this place here. I'm not gonna let a disease kill me. So if you want to talk to me, put 3 matches on and stand 18 feet back. Straight up. That's what it was. I was in court. I'm going back and forth to court. I knew freedom was at hand. And I'm seeing them bringing these guys, getting sick. And they just put them in a cell to die. I'm thinking about people in the world. The medical system is already strained. You go in that cell in one of the prisons, nobody not coming to rescue you. They're just gonna put you in that cell and let you die. I knew that. And I refused to be one of the men to be hauled in that cell to die. And I protected myself and I encouraged everybody around me. Bed partner, put your mask on. When you go to sleep, put the cover over your head, put the mask on too. You cough too loud, man, make sure you cover your mouth. I was enforcing my own rules on everybody in my circumference. Because I knew one thing. I didn't come this far to die by a disease.
So I come home 2019, January the 9th. When the pandemic hit, I had guys calling every day, from prison, like, bro, it's crazy here. It's like, it's hell. One of the guys, I'm like, it's gonna be all right. Tomorrow I'm gonna see your mom. You got a court date coming up. I get a phone call 2 days later, he died from COVID. And so I'm starting getting these phone calls, getting JPEGs, hey, such and such died. I'm like, all right, so step back, right? You got to make some type of difference, right? You doing this reentry thing. Some of these guys ain't gonna live to see the reentry plan, right? And just reached out to different lawyers and attorneys that I know, like, hey, let's try to get some of these guys on. If it's the older guys who already sick on hospital, let's get them home. That failed, right? So that was like, prison is stressful by itself, right? But for me, it's like I'm living in prison all over again. I can't go nowhere. I'm free. These guys constantly calling, getting JPay, like, bro, I'm not gonna make it. You already know I got asthma. I'm not right, and so it's like I'm back in prison. I'm frustrated. I'm lost. I don't know what to do. So my thing is just like continue to sending guys JP, right? Visit their parents. Like it's gonna be all right. I'm searching for a solution, looking for help. Just so happened, then it went away. And some of the guys was, stay strong.
Thank you for sharing that. Sarah, for the next few questions is for everyone. I'm gonna start with the last film that's connected to the first film. One of the things I was really struck by and I took a note of that was mentioned is that the healing power of connection in the first film. And in the last film, we heard the storytelling of family members, especially mothers, as relates to visiting their sons. And we could talk about what is the type of connections and the work that we could do to connect more with women who are incarcerated. In this moment here, I want us to think about, one of the things I was really struck by the last film was the sound of the connection, not so much the visual, to be able to hear people calling and leaving the messages for their loved ones. If you all wouldn't mind thinking about the healing power of connection and the destructive nature of disconnection, which we saw in the film about me. If you would all just share or reflect anything that came up or what you was reminded of as relates to comparing the first film and the last film.
I went to prison when I was 17, full prison. I never stayed with my mom. We had a bad relationship. So like the first 5 years in prison, I'm getting no visits. I'm getting no letters, no mail, like just living a prison life. About like 6 years in, my mom came to see me and, we had our talk. For me, it was like, all right, I forgive you for, what you did. And I'm like, you know what, I don't care if I go home, I'm good. That connection, I didn't want to let her go. We cried for like 4 hours in a visiting shed. And so looking at the film, and when the lady said that, her and her son cried and laughed, right? I had to put my head down like and fight back in tears. Like, man, I remember the first time my mom walked in there, all pretty and hair all on, like, man, right? And so it was painful from hearing her talk because everything she was saying that my mom said, right? But we laughed, we played, and yeah, it just was a painful moment for me.
So I think about the first film and the second film. So the first film reminds me of Angola. They have a lot of connections. I mean, it's an open air prison. People able to come in from all walks of life, visit with you, sit with you, and talk with you. But the last film reminded me of Camp J, which was their general population. So in Camp J, like their general population is a cell block, Camp J is designed to break all connections. It's designed to break your spirit. They have, in mental health terms, they have what is called social sensory deprivation. That's what Camp J do. It deprives you of all senses. Sense of touch, smell, taste, feel, everything. And when you can tell when an individual has been in Camp J, when they come back in the dormitory, they move a certain way. They walk slow, like robotic. Certain sounds jarring, certain sights, you can see it. And everybody knows this individual here was in the cell block. And I'm looking at these guys in general population on the last film, and I'm like, man, we are in Louisiana, and we just forced DOC to end solitary confinement. Like the cell blocks. These guys are able to come out their cell now on a tip. Extended lockdowns, at one time, when you go in that cell extended lockdown, you're in there 23 hours at once. No connection, no talking. But now the cell blocks are opening up because of the work we're doing down here. And I'm thinking about the prison in Virginia. These brothers are in general population in lockdown units 24 hours a day. It don't make me feel good to be in Louisiana, but it just makes me realize that Louisiana is not the worst. But I just saw on that television, that's the worst. We went to Mississippi, that was the worst. The work we're doing in Louisiana is, we are ahead of the curve and all do is still fucked up. We are ahead of the curve. And I think about the first video, my mom, this woman drove them 2 hours and a half, 25 years, twice a month. And people ask me, how did you survive it? I was in Camp J for 8 years, off and on, general population rest. How did you survive my prison ordeal? I said, bro, a lot of love from my family and a whole lot of girlfriends. For real, that's how I survived it. That's how I survived it. So those connections, if you have someone incarcerated, you know someone incarcerated, a hug go a long way. My mom used to hug me. I used to feel that love. I remember her touch when I was a kid. And it just triggered those memories. And for that brief moment, I forgot I was in jail. I forgot I had been incarcerated 20 years. You know what I'm saying? She'll hug me, she'll put them all around me, come here, my baby. And she'll squeeze me, and I'll hug her. And in that moment, I wasn't in prison. And the moment I opened my eyes, they were a nightmare. I am in prison. But you know, connections are important, very, very, they're key to surviving. We need that love inside. We need that love, and need the affection, need the community. The radio, music soothes the savage beast. And that's why those brothers were so driven behind that music. They didn't have nothing else. You walk in any prison, in any dormitory, you're going to see headphones on, and everybody's going to be doing this. That's the escape. That's the escape from that horrible, miserable reality, that music.
Thank you. I'm so glad both of y'all are here. Thank you so much. I'll be quick. I think both of those films reminded me of how incredibly human and necessary that type of connection and community is, and how that's often cited, especially by, as part of lived experience, as a solution to climate change, as a solution to building this new world that we both have to build and need. And often a lot of very fancy policy experts with very fancy degrees dismiss things like community as a climate solution, but it very clearly is. I think it's probably a solution to so many of our problems that we don't realize.
So, I always like to give good honor. I remember in the cell, I had a fight, and I fell in the cell with Ronald. And, my re-entry process started when I got in the cell with him. He told me, all that being depressed, that ain't gonna get it, right? Get your dictionary, get your book, find out about you, right? And so that's when I discovered my trauma, right, or where it started from. And when I found out where my trauma started from, I started working on my re-entry plan. And because of that, I gotta give him and Laura, really, they flowers now, because it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't have been one of the first people to be a certified sign interpreter or veterinary assistant. Just being in that cell with him, he gave me what I needed, right? Because I was bitter, right? And I wanted everybody around me to be bitter. And plus, he encouraged me to get a lot of girlfriends too.
Thank you. I appreciate hearing that story because it's already tied to my next question. I want to hold this in a way that's not too, you hear that echo sound? Is how, Shon, you was 17 years old, right? At 17 years old, you're in a violent institution, coming of age. With the third film, Move, the main protagonist of the film said, I was born in prison, right? And in the last film and the first film, we saw not just the power of connection from family members and loved ones, the connection between each other. And you're showing, when you just shared your story, how Ronald, not simply encouraged in terms of, and again, a girlfriend is a metaphor. It's about those connections, right? It's a letter writing to keep your spirits up, right? The impact, you mentioned trauma, the impact of incarceration. In the film about Move, we could see his mother was gone for 40 years. That's a long time. Right? So he didn't get a chance to get to know his mother in terms of pre-incarceration, right? She was gone from the very beginning. And in the film, they also showed the contradiction and the pain of what does freedom mean when there is still anger from loved ones who felt left behind and no fault of their own or no fault of their parents' own. The ability to be able to tell stories of the pain, of the loss, while also still holding up the person, is a skill. So I'm curious about your reflections on that particular film and what may have come up. And also for, people like Mary and I who have not served time incarcerated, thinking about the ways in which confinement exists both away in the context of prisons, but also the way confinement exists in the ways our communities are segregated and also disproportionately harmed and impact. Different types of policies. We could talk about climate, but there was other policies that came up in that film as he's naming these neighborhoods and these residents who are no longer there. How that neighborhood have changed a lot. So what came up for you all with that particular film?
So I'm familiar with Move 9, John Africa and them. They inspired one of the books I published from prison, August Rebellion. And I'm talking about their story that inspired me. I mean, if y'all don't know who Move 9 is, what happened to that family, the federal government firebombed their house from the sky and flooded it with almost 18 tons of water. And their case is so significant. The house was on a hill. The police officer got shot in the back of the head and the bullet went up, came out the front. But all these people was convicted for murder of this officer, and if they had killed, if the bullet had came out of their house, it would have been on a downward spiral. That's why all of them are coming home now. That was according to our poet J. Allen Wood. But the one thing that came down for me, the Move family, and that's my first time seeing them on the film, and I watched it today in the office when Emily sent it to me. I watched it, and it really touched me because I had been familiar with this story for a long time. In terms of the trauma, so I teach trauma on the weekends in Angola. I go up there and sit in a classroom with reentry guys, and I teach them trauma-informed care. And the reason why I'm doing it and not a mental health director is because the mental health director does not have the lived experience to make the trauma-informed care relatable to a bunch of kids. They come from the same community I come from. We have the same experiences. When I talk about trauma, I make the information accessible to them. And the beauty of this thing is, every time I teach this trauma class, every time, somebody in that classroom breaks down in tears because no one had ever created a space, I'm talking about a space where they can be comfortable, feel love, and talk about everything that happened to them from their early childhood experience that led them to the gates of prison. They cry. And some of these guys have more ACEs than I have. I have 9 adverse childhood experiences. The only one I don't have, I've never been sexually assaulted by anyone. But when you have that many ACEs, you're even more prone to all the medical conditions that guys are dying by in prison. Heart attacks, strokes, cancer, respiratory failure. And I'm teaching them how to preserve themselves, how to save their own life. The more triggers you have, the higher your stress level, the lower immune health you have, which makes you susceptible to every medical condition there is. So when I go in that classroom, I sit down with them, I tell them, man, I'm trying to save your life. You're already inside what is called complex PTSD. Prison is complex PTSD. And you're inside of it. You can't escape it. So what can you do inside of complex PTSD to lower your stress level? How do you deal with that? It's complicated. It's not easy. That's what came to my mind when God talked about his trauma. I work 7 days a freaking week. I'm talking about I work 5 days at Vote, and I'm in Angola 2 days, Saturdays and Sundays. And I've been doing that for the last 20, 30 weeks. And I'm not on here. It's hard. But I'm trying to save these young men lives because I know one thing. If I could just get these guys to understand what triggers that anger, what triggers that aggressive tendencies, when they walk out of prison, they have a better grip on society and we'll be much safer by it. I believe that. I just said I have the same aggressive, violent tendencies because nobody never took the time to tell me, hey man, that's trauma response. That's a trauma response. Nobody didn't teach me that. I taught myself that. I sat in that dormitory every single day and read trauma books and law books. Every day for the last 20 years, I'm reading trauma. Everybody, you reading mental health books? You ain't crazy? No, I ain't crazy. It makes sense to me. In the dormitory, it's like a laboratory. I'm reading trauma and I'm seeing all these behavior practices that's identified in the book. I'm like, damn. I'm seeing everybody's behavior patterns every single day in the dorm. It's a microcosm of society. I can see it. I know what he about to do. I know what he about to do. I know what he about to do. I've been watching their pattern for the last 20 years. Reading trauma. Then I started to teach it. Because the violence was so high at Rayburn, I said, I know that. I told the water. I said, if you wanted that violence on that yard to decrease, give me a classroom and give me access to them youngsters and watch how the violence come down. And guess what? A year after teaching the class, all the stabbings dropped. And I knew if I could do it in a prison setting, we can do it in society. We don't need no mental health jail, period. They're trying to build a $110 million pan-octagon design jail for mental health. No, we don't need mental health in jail. We need mental health in our freaking communities.
We do the same thing. I work at Louisiana Center for Children's Rights, and so we deal with the kids that's 17 and under, and little kids that's still in other codes, right? So they say, So when I do my intake, oh, I don't care what they come to jail for. My thing is like, why you was so mad you had to hurt this person breaking his car, right? Let's deal with the trauma. Everybody say the same thing. One of the kids just told me yesterday, Mama, I'm in the same place I'm at. Right? She want to hang out with me and my friends. Right? That's this trauma. I don't want my mama hanging around with me. Right? And so I'm big on let's find out where trauma started. For me, my trauma started when my mom like, hey, go live with my mama, which is your grandmother, because I wanted a light-skinned, curly-haired girl. Like, not even that dog. What the hell? Right? So that's where my trauma started. Prison is prison, right? But it wasn't trauma for me. My trauma started from what she told me that sent me to prison, right? So I'm looking at these kids like we gotta deal with this trauma, some type of way, right? So I don't care. I know why you steal the car, because it's trauma. A normal person not just gonna steal a car. They ain't like they selling them. They taking them from point A, bringing them to point B, leaving them, going back home, getting a little snack. That's it, right? So. Like Marshall, and I get all this from him. I'm big on trauma, trying to understand how we can instead of having police go to these kids, let's give somebody a lived experience to go to their house for a little simple domestic violence and sit down and talk, right? Not put somebody on the ground, put the feet on their neck, take your ass to jail, right? Because in jail, I mean, they don't have no trauma care. I tried to see a social worker in Angola. They're like, listen, so you don't want to do that. We're gonna put you in the cell by yourself. We're gonna give you something better. You're gonna be a Looney Tune, right? Don't do that. And so I look at these kids like, don't ask for a social worker, right? You need any problems, send for me. I got you. Right? So the biggest thing, we need to find out and help these kids and these families identify where this trauma started and our community can be safe.
And just to add one more thing, I have to say this. Because on most of the videos, I just kept seeing the phrase, invest in communities, not cages. Invest in communities, not cages. And I'll never forget, I was doing some reading, and they had this Russian scientist, and he developed this concept called social engineering, right? And he was doing it at the order of Stalin, the Russian dictator at the time. So he set aside this big old laboratory, built this big old cage. And he used these bombs, like thousands of them, just threw in the cage. With everything that can make life sustainable. Water, food, grass, wheels, balls, games, everything. They had everything in the cage. And then every week he began to take some out the cage until nothing remained in the cage but the vermins. What you think happened? They began to eat each other. The games, the balls, the food, the toys, all that represents opportunities in the communities. When you take opportunities out of the community, you have what we have in New Orleans. Invest in communities, not cages. We need wraparound services. We need that.
I'll be quick. I guess it's going back to the question about the film about Move. I actually never heard the story told after the firebombing. So people kind of just gloss over that. And what it brought to the fore for me was the reverberating effects of incarceration, right? It's not just the person who goes to prison, it's the entire community, it's their family, and that was also very clear in the film about the radio station. And so, yeah, it made me think a lot about how in the events of like extreme weather events, like hurricanes and wildfires, the anguish of loved ones who can't get their loved ones out of prison and their loved ones who can't decide whether or not to evacuate, right? Like that's not within their control. And they just have to hope, that the fire turns or the hurricane turns or that maybe they'll evacuate. So yeah, that's just what it brought to mind for me.
Yes.
So this is our last round of questions, and thank you all for sharing. And one of the things I just want to note, for me that didn't come up in the film, after the bombing, I believe it was 1980 or 81, something like that. 78.
1978.
The bombing was in 78?
Yeah. No, the bond.
No, the bombing, it was 80, yes. People died in the fire, and the city of Philadelphia held the remains of people who died and then turned it over to specialists. I can't remember what type of scientist, medical person, and held the remains of family members. And it wasn't until it was exposed within the past 2 years or so and forced both the city and also the university to return the loved ones. So even in death, the violence continues. Okay. One thing I just want to bring up, and to come to those two shorts that was in between the films, is to think about there's the, the trauma and the social conditions, right? Like the horse, it's not the horses, right? That the conversation is not the people, it's the conditions that create the trauma, which is also directly tied to when we think about the social system in which we live, and the violence of patriarchy and the violence of white supremacy, and how it's manifested in everyday life through the economic system that we live in. That's just fact. So one of the things I was struck about the first short, which was the second film, how it told the story, the history of policing, right? And then the second short attempted to talk about the ways in which the funding that we're investing in policing, how we can invest in communities, right? So there's two things that stood out that I would like for you all, if you would mind commenting on, and this is our final questions, and I have a few announcements to make, going back to the comments that you all just shared, thinking about the investment in communities, how do we tell the story of what's happening in the violence that doesn't reduce families and community members, especially Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, to just sheer statistics, or to just what they need as opposed to what they possess, right? When I think about George Floyd and his murder, still angry. It's multiple things, right? One is this movement was galvanized at the death of a Black man in ways that the death of a Black woman or non-binary queer person doesn't really raise the bar the same. And at the same time, my anger, that was one level of anger. Then there's the anger of, I know George Floyd's name simply because he was murdered by the police, not because of the person that he was. His interest, his connection to his family, his daughter, his brothers, right? And so in thinking about that short, about the history of policing and how it's tethered to the violent formation of this country, to racial slavery, indigenous genocide, to labor exploitation, and it just keeps going. And then the other film is like, let's invest not in policing, but in communities. I'm turning it over to you all for comments, reflections, and thoughts to send to the audience about making those connections. The power of storytelling, how to tell these stories with respect and integrity of the people that's harmed.
It's making me think of defund the police as a climate solution, because that money could go to funding climate solutions. It could go toward paying, firefighters what they actually should be paid, including prison well, we wouldn't have prison firefighters anymore at that point. So it makes me think of like what we could be investing in. And I don't think it's an accident that there usually is a direct line from prison abolitionists to, from environmental justice advocates actually, to prison abolitionists. Like a lot of them go through that pipeline. And I think that it also makes me think of reparations as a climate solution. And when I say climate solution, I really just mean saving this world of ours, right? Like what I was saying earlier is like, is the world ending? And like, it will if we let it. and we have the power not to let that happen. So I think when we use our voices and tell our own stories, we never become statistics. We never become dehumanized, because we all have extremely powerful voices, even just in the simplest sort of terms, right? Like I learned how to write by listening to Black folks in Mississippi talk. So and so hasn't done me wrong yet. So
Thank you.
I believe, so, we need police, right? We gotta just like take on the police storm one way, right? But I believe we need more trauma-informed people to come out to the community, right? Every time something going wrong, got a loved one, he got some type of mental sickness, right? We'll call the police. We need somebody with lived experience in that area to go out there and assess the situation, right? Only thing we have is the police, right? And that's why when they know that's the only thing we have. So when they come, they cause all the trauma. Nothing get right, with the police. We need trauma informed. We need more nurses, right, to come to assess the situation and make it better.
So I'm thinking about how I read this book Stamped from the beginning, blew my freaking mind. How these people, human beings, struck out for their freedom, because they didn't want to be on a plantation, and this establishment labeled them as criminals and told these slave catchers to go get them. And now today, on 290 Broad, we have what is called a criminal justice system. The word criminal is rooted in racism. That term was created to demean those people, but yet we have a criminal justice system on 290 Broad and all around this country. We're still using the word criminal to describe people. And we can vote, we have a language changer. So we changing the language on how we talk about our people. If you interview me and you say the wrong word out your mouth, I'm going to correct you in that interview. You can't say nothing to meaning toward the people I represent. And when it comes to my lived experience and my story, I'll never be a statistic. But the one thing I would never be toward anyone asking, don't tokenize me. Don't have me speaking for you just to hear my voice. And you refuse to give me a position of power to change this thing. Don't do me that. Because now we got a freaking problem. We have a problem. I'm not a token kid. And if I think you're tokenizing me by putting me on a podium to hear me speak, you'll never ever be able to call on me again and hear me speak. But when it comes to telling our story, if you have a story, tell it. Because I've seen the power of story change the minds of some of the staunch conservatives on Capitol Hill. They was going to kill a number of bills until some people stood at that microphone and told that story. That conservative bloc of Republicans said, hold up. We cannot kill this bill. We can amend it, but we can't kill it. That's the power of story. I wrote a book, 2 of them from prison, called August Rebellion. It's on Amazon. Get you a copy of it. You want to hear a powerful story? Get that book. It's going to take you inside that prison. It's going to let you see the trauma. It's going to let you see the rage. It's going to let you see how people have changed their roles from Klansmen to judges, senators, representatives, and all types of elected officials. Get the book. Tell the story if you have one. Tell it. If you're not going to be a statistic, you're going to change some minds because you have a thing. If you have never been on the road where the rubber meets the road, you can't tell the story how it burns your skin. Nobody can tell me how rubber hits the road, because if you've never been on the road where I've been at, you can't talk about that. How it burned my skin, it scorched my face. You can't talk about that. How a man in a cell block had his hand slammed in the ball. You can't talk about that. We just had a conversation with some attorneys, and they wondered why they using my name to get mojo in the prison. The prison called her, did you send this package in? No, I didn't send that package in. Come to find out, it's filled with mojo. She wanted to know why would somebody on the street use her name to send mojo into the prison. And I explained to her, that's 100 sheets of legal paper. Guess how much one sheet of legal paper costs at mojo? $10,000. She didn't know that. The lived experiences I have knew that. And see how it informed her? That's why they use your name. That's 100 sheets of paper. Each page costs $10,000. How much that is? 10,000 times 100. But serious though, tell your story. Lived experience are the power that's going to change the narrative and how people talk about us. I'm on like 4 LEAP panels, lived experience advisory panels. One of them was C4, and on this level here, we are influencing Congress, United States Congress, with our lived experience to change laws. And I'm on 2 task forces in Louisiana, using our lived experience to change law. Lived experiences are the power. Academia, the data droppers from the ivory towers, they're good at what they do. But they can't talk about how that rubber meets the road. They can't talk about that.
So I'm gonna resist from commenting because there's a lot of things that came up. But I wanna, if you all would join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists. If there are any takeaways, there was a few that stood out. One of the most I want, and Ronald, thank you for bringing us here, is thinking about the social conditions of violence, white supremacy, and patriarchy in our political system. Is what leads to the different forms of trauma. It's also the lived experiences of people that we have to lift up and center in all of the work that we're doing, both as people directly impacted by incarceration, people who are directly impacted, who may also benefit from people being pulled and facing prisons and jails and cages, and also the ways in which prison, jails, and cages exist in our everyday lives. Police cannot solve everything. They respond to violence with violence. And so there are solutions. And then there are many organizations that are listed on this blue, beautiful block who are engaging in different strategies and solutions, inviting us to join them on this solution of liberation. So you all are invited to do the QR code thing, learn about these organizations and support their work. I don't work for Amazon, so I'm not going to advertise for Amazon. But I will encourage you to buy Ronald's book. Good night, everyone.